I've always thought silence was just the absence of sound. A quiet room, a paused conversation, a moment to breathe. But lately, silence has taken on a different shape in our home. It's not empty anymore. It's heavy, like a fog that clings to every corner, making it hard to see Sarah, even when she's sitting right across from me at the dinner table. I'm Mark, and this is my story, though I wish it weren't. It's the story of how I started to feel my world unravel, thread by thread, in ways I never saw coming. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it felt steady. 7 years, a cozy house in the suburbs, routines that fit like a worn-in pair of shoes. Sarah was the warmth to my logic, the one who'd laugh at my overthinking and pull me out of my head. I thought we were fine. But fine, I'm learning, can be a fragile thing. Somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing the little things. The way her smiles didn't linger as long. The way her eyes seemed to search for something I wasn't giving. I didn't ask. I should have. Sarah started joining this support group about a year ago. She said it was for stress, a place to talk about the weight of work and life. I was glad for her. I nodded when she mentioned it, tell her it sounded like a good idea, but I didn't dig deeper. I didn't ask what she shared there or who she met. I figured she'd tell me if it mattered. Looking back, I see how I let those moments slip, how I left space for something else to grow in the gaps I didn't fill. Before I go further, let me pause for a second. I wonder if any of you have ever felt this kind of unease, that nagging sense that something's off, but you can't pin it down. If you're listening from somewhere far or near, drop a comment to let me know where you're at. And if this story's pulling you in, hit that subscribe button. It means more than you know. The signs were small at first, so subtle I almost missed them. Sarah's phone started staying face down on the counter when it used to sit carelessly open. One night, I noticed she'd changed her password. I didn't even know why I checked, just a reflex when I grabbed her phone to look up a restaurant. The screen locked me out, and something cold settled in my chest. She'd flinch sometimes, too, when I walked into the room while she was texting, her thumb quick to darken the screen. I told myself it was nothing. People need privacy, right? Then there were the meetings. Her support group sessions started running late, stretching past the usual hour or two. She'd come home with vague excuses, something about extra discussions, or a new facilitator. I gnawed, but the unease grew. One evening, I caught a whiff of a scent on her jacket, sharp and unfamiliar, like cedar and something sweeter. Not her usual perfume. Not mine. I asked about it, casual as I could manage, and she laughed it off, said it was probably from someone's cologne in the group. I wanted to believe her. One night, I couldn't shake it. She was curled up on the couch, texting, a soft smile playing on her lips. I asked who she was talking to, just making conversation, or so I told myself. She jumped, her phone flipping face down in her lap, her eyes wide for a split second before she recovered. Just a friend from the group, she said, her voice a touch too bright. My stomach twisted. That smile wasn't for me. The real crack came a week later. I ran into Jen, a mutual friend who'd been part of the same group. We chatted at the coffee shop, and I mentioned Sarah's meetings. Jen frowned, said she'd quit the group months ago, that they'd moved locations to a community center across town. Not the library, where Sarah said she'd been going. My coffee went cold in my hands. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, but inside, my mind was racing. That night, I lay awake, Sarah's steady breathing beside me, a stark contrast to the storm in my head. I replayed every moment, every excuse, every flinch. I wanted to trust her. I'd built my life around her, around us. But the pieces weren't fitting anymore. Worse, I started to wonder about my own role in this. Had I been too distant, too caught up in work, too quick to assume everything was fine? The doubt gnawed at me, sharp and relentless. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. The silence wasn't just heavy now. It was suffocating. The weight of Jen's words clung to me like damp clothes after a storm. I couldn't shake the image of Sarah's face when she'd brushed off my questions, that fleeting flicker of something I couldn't name. I wanted to believe there was an explanation, something simple to stitch the pieces back together. But the truth was louder than my hopes, and it was screaming in the quiet moments. I couldn't pretend anymore. I needed to know. It started with a credit card statement, slipped into a pile of mail I'd ignored for too long. A charge caught my eye, a dinner at a restaurant I'd never heard of, in a part of town we never visited. I checked the date. It matched one of Sarah's late group nights. My pulse quickened as I pulled up her phone's location history, something I'd never thought to do before. The map showed her miles away from the library that night, pinned to an address that matched the restaurant. My hand shook as I closed the app. I felt like I was betraying her, but the betrayal staring back at me felt sharper. I made a choice then, one that twisted my gut even as I committed to it. I had to find proof, something undeniable to silence the part of me still clinging to trust. I started small, careful not to disturb the fragile balance of our home. Late at night, when Sarah was asleep, I'd slip into the study and comb through her browser history. I found searches for cafes and hotels, places she'd never mentioned. I dug through receipts tucked in her purse, my heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards. Each scrap of evidence was a cut, small but deep, carving away the life I thought we had. One night, I went further. Sarah had left her phone charging in the kitchen, a rare lapse. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the screen. This wasn't me, sneaking like a thief in my own house. But I typed in her old password, half expecting it to fail. It didn't. The screen unlocked, and I scrolled through her messages, my breath shallow. I found a thread with someone named Alex, short text about meeting up, nothing explicit but enough to make my skin crawl. I heard a noise upstairs, Sarah stirring, and I fumbled the phone back onto the counter, my heart slamming against my ribs. She appeared at the doorway, rubbing her eyes, asking what I was doing up. I mumbled something about a glass of water, my voice unsteady, and she didn't press. But her gaze lingered, and I wondered if she knew. I couldn't stop there. The next week, I followed her. I told myself it was just one time, just to ease my mind. I waited in my car outside the library, watching her pull away after saying she had a meeting. She didn't head toward the community center Jen had mentioned. Instead, she drove to a sleek building downtown, one with glass doors and a doorman who nodded like he knew her. I parked across the street, my hands gripping the wheel, every nerve on edge. When she stepped out of her car, a man was waiting. Tall, sharp jawline, a smile that made my stomach lurch. They walked inside together, her hand brushing his arm. I sat frozen, the world tilting under me. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew he was the shadow I'd been chasing. I spent the next day piecing it together. A reverse search on the building's address led me to a rental listing, a short-term apartment. I cross-checked Sarah's credit card charges and found a payment to a booking agency tied to the same address. Then I dug into her contacts, matching the number from her text to a profile online. Alex Carter, a consultant with a polished smile and a LinkedIn page that screamed confidence. Every click felt like a step deeper into a place I didn't want to go. I couldn't carry it alone anymore. I called Dave, my oldest friend, the one who'd seen me through every mess life had thrown my way. We met at a bar, the kind too loud for anyone to overhear. I spilled everything, the receipts, the texts, the man I'd seen. My voice cracked as I admitted how lost I felt. Dave listened, his face steady, but his eyes heavy. He didn't sugarcoat it. He said I deserved the truth, but he also pressed me to think about my own blind spots. Had I been there for Sarah, really there, or had I let work and routine build a wall between us? His words stung, but they landed. I wasn't ready to face that part yet, but I couldn't unhear it. The days after blurred into a haze. I barely slept, my mind replaying that moment outside the building, Sarah's hand on his arm. I stopped eating much, my appetite replaced by a knot that wouldn't loosen. I catch my reflection and see a stranger, hollow-eyed, unraveling. The betrayal was a blade, but what hurt more was knowing I'd helped sharpen it. I'd ignored the signs, let her drift, and now I was drowning in the consequences. I didn't know how this would end, but I knew I couldn't turn back. The truth was out there, and I was running toward it, even if it broke me. The truth was a splinter under my skin, impossible to ignore. I'd seen Sarah with Alex, watched them disappear into that glass-fronted building, and the image burned behind my eyes every time I closed them. I couldn't keep circling it, gathering scraps of proof like a scavenger. I needed to face it head-on, to rip the bandage off and see the wound for what it was. I decided to confront them, to catch them where they thought they were safe. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the pieces of myself I'd lost in the fog of doubt. I planned it carefully, mapping out their next meeting based on Sarah's text I'd glimpsed. They'd arranged to meet at that same downtown apartment on Friday evening. I marked the date in my mind, each day leading up to it a slow grind of nerves and resolve. The night before, I stood in our bedroom, staring at Sarah's side of the closet, her clothes neatly hung like nothing had changed. For a moment, I wavered. I saw us years ago, laughing over spilled wine on our first date, her head on my shoulder during late-night movies. I almost backed out, almost convinced myself I could live with a not knowing. But then I pictured her hand brushing Alex's arm, and the hesitation crumbled. I had to go. Friday came, and I left work early, my stomach a knot of dread and adrenaline. I drove toward the city, the radio off, the hum of the engine filling the silence. My mind churned with memories, the good ones sharp enough to cut. Our wedding day, Sarah's smile under the veil. The night we moved into our house, dancing in an empty living room. But those images collided with the present, with her secretive smiles and locked phone screens. The contrast fueled me, kept my foot on the gas even as my heart begged me to turn back. Traffic slowed to a crawl on the highway, a fender bender clogging the lanes. I gripped the wheel, frustration boiling over as minutes ticked by. Every second felt like a chance for them to slip away, for the moment to pass. I took deep breaths, forcing myself to stay calm, but my hands trembled. When the road finally cleared, I sped up, the city lights blurring past like accusations. I reached the building just as dusk settled, parking across the street, my pulsive drumbeat in my ears. I waited, eyes locked on the entrance. My phone buzzed, a text from Dave checking in, but I didn't reply. I couldn't break focus. Then I saw her. Sarah stepped out of a cab, her coat pulled tight against the evening chill. Alex was there, leaning against the doorframe, his casual ease a punch to my gut. They exchanged a look, brief but intimate, and disappeared inside. I sat frozen, my breath shallow, every nerve screaming to move. I gave a minute, then another, letting the reality sink in. This was it. I crossed the street, my legs unsteady, and slipped past the doorman with a nod, pretending I belonged. The elevator ride was a blur, each floor a countdown to the inevitable. I found the apartment number from the booking receipt, my hand hovering over the door. I knocked, sharp and deliberate, my heart slamming against my ribs. Footsteps approached, and the door opened. Sarah stood there, her face draining of color, her eyes wide with shock. Behind her, Alex froze mid-step, a glass in his hand. Time slowed. Sarah's mouth opened, but no words came. Alex set his glass down, his jaw tight, assessing me like a threat. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, the click loud in the silence. I didn't shout, not yet. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the credit card charge, the location history, the text thread I'd screenshot. I laid it out, piece by piece, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. Sarah's eyes darted to Alex, then back to me, her hands twisting together. She tried to speak, stumbling over excuses. It wasn't what I thought, she said. They were just friends, just talking. But her voice cracked, and I saw the lie unravel in her eyes. Alex stayed silent, his gaze fixed on the floor, letting her flounder. I pressed harder, asking why she'd lied about the group, the meetings, the perfume I'd smelled. Each word was a stone, building a wall between us. Sarah's defenses crumbled, and she snapped, her voice rising. She accused me of being distant, of burying myself in work, of leaving her to carry the weight of us alone. Her words hit like a slap, not because they were wrong, but because they weren't entirely untrue. I turned to Alex, demanding to know what he wanted, why he'd stepped into our lives. He shrugged, his nonchalance infuriating, saying he was just there for Sarah, nothing more. I didn't believe him, but it didn't matter. The room felt too small, the air too thick. Sarah was crying now, her face a mess of guilt and anger, but I felt no urge to comfort her. I looked at her, really looked, and saw a stranger where my wife used to be. I made my choice. I told her it was over, my voice flat, final. I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and walked out, ignoring her choked sob, Alex's silence, the weight of their eyes on my back. The elevator ride down was a descent into a new kind of emptiness, not just loss but release. I stepped into the night, the city noise rushing in, and for the first time in weeks, I breathed deeply. The truth was out, raw and jagged, but it was mine now. I'd faced it, and I'd walked away. The storm had broken, and I was still standing, even if my legs shook with every step. The door of that apartment closed behind me, but the echo of that night followed me home. I didn't sleep, not really. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, the silence of our house louder than ever. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay. I packed a bag, just enough, for a week, and left a note for Sarah saying I'd be at a hotel. I didn't say goodbye. I drove away from our life, the rearview mirror framing a house that no longer felt like mine. The road ahead was blurry, not from rain, but from the weight pressing against my chest. I told the people who mattered most. Dave was first, meeting me at a diner where the coffee was too weak to match my exhaustion. He didn't push, just sat there, his presence steady as I unraveled the confrontation. He offered his guest room, but I needed space, not company. My sister Emily was next. I called her, my voice breaking as I admitted everything. She listened, her soft sighs carrying across the line, and promised to visit soon. Their support was a lifeline, but it couldn't erase the hollow ache inside me. The legal process began quickly, a machinery of paperwork and cold negotiations. I hired a lawyer, a brisk woman who outlined the steps to untangle our lives. Dividing assets felt like carving up memories. The house we'd painted together, the savings we'd built for a future that wouldn't come. Every meeting drained me, not because of the money, but because it made the end real. I moved into a small apartment, the kind with thin walls and a view of a parking lot. It wasn't home, but it was mine, a blank slate I wasn't ready to fill. One afternoon, I ran into Sarah at the lawyer's office. We hadn't spoken since that night, and the sight of her stopped me cold. She looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed, her usual grace dulled. I nodded, a reflex, and she hesitated, like she wanted to speak. The air between us crackled with unspoken words, but neither of us broke the silence. Our lawyers ushered us into separate rooms, and I sat through the meeting with my jaw tight, her presence lingering like a bruise. Walking out, I saw her in the hallway, signing papers, her hand unsteady. I turned away, my throat burning, and left without a word. I heard about Sarah and Alex through whispers, the kind that travel through mutual friends. Their affair didn't last. Alex vanished, leaving her to pick up the pieces alone. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction, but it was fleeting. I didn't want her to suffer. Not really. I just wanted to understand why it had all fallen apart. I learned she'd started therapy, grappling with her choices, maybe even regretting them. I didn't reach out. That door was closed, and I wasn't ready to open it, not even a crack. The real work was inside me. I started seeing a therapist, a quiet man with a knack for cutting through my defenses. At first, I hated it, sitting there dissecting my pain like a science project. But slowly, I began to see the threads I'd ignored. I'd been distant, not just with Sarah, but with myself. I'd buried myself in spreadsheets and deadlines, thinking provision was enough. I hadn't listened, hadn't noticed her slipping away. The realization was a blade, sharp and necessary. I wasn't blameless, and owning that hurt more than her betrayal. Some days, the grief surged without warning. I'd find a photo of us on my phone, or hear a song from our early days, and the loss would hit like a wave. I'd sit in my car, hands clenched, letting it pass. But other days, I felt lighter. I walked to a coffee shop, read a book without checking my phone, or call Emily just to hear her laugh. Healing wasn't linear, my therapist said, and I clung to that when the dark moments came. I rebuilt my life in small steps. I took up running, the rhythm of my feet grounding me when my thoughts spiraled. I reconnected with friends I'd let drift, their stories pulling me out of my head. I even tried cooking, burning half my attempts, but laughing at the mess. Each choice was a brick, laying the foundation for something new. I wasn't whole yet, but I was moving toward it, one stubborn step at a time. The lessons came slowly, carved from the wreckage. Love wasn't just a feeling, but a choice to show up, to listen, to see. Trust was fragile, and rebuilding it started with myself. I learned to forgive, not Sarah, not yet, but me. I'd failed us in my own way, and I had to let that go to move forward. I set boundaries, not out of fear, but respect for the man I was becoming. My worth wasn't tied to her choices, and that truth, hard won, became my anchor. I stood at the edge of my new life, scars and all, and felt something shift. The past wasn't gone, but it wasn't my master anymore. I'd faced the fallout, sifted through the ashes, and found something worth keeping. Myself. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, I wanted to walk it. Time passed, not in a rush, but in a steady rhythm, like waves smoothing jagged stones. Months turned into a year, and the raw edges of my pain dulled, no longer cutting with every breath. I wasn't the man I'd been before the betrayal, nor did I want to be. I was something new, scarred but stronger, standing in a life I'd built from the ground up. The wounds hadn't vanished, but they'd become part of me, like lines in a map I'd learned to navigate. I found peace in small moments. One morning, I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in gold and pink. A bird landed nearby, chirping softly, and I smiled without effort. Another day, I joined Dave for a hike, our laughter echoing through the trees as we traded stories, no shadow of the past hanging over us. I started volunteering at a community center, teaching kids to code, their eager questions pulling me into a joy I'd forgotten. These were my signs, quiet but clear, that I was coming back to myself. I looked forward, not with the reckless hope of youth, but with a grounded belief in what I could shape. I enrolled in a photography class, capturing moments that felt fleeting yet eternal, like the way light danced on a river. I planned a trip alone, somewhere with mountains and open skies, craving the space to dream without boundaries. The past was there, a shadow at my heels, but it no longer dictated my steps. I made peace with it, not by forgetting, but by choosing what to carry. This journey has reached its end, and I'm grateful you've walked it with me. I'd love to hear how this story landed for you. What stirred your heart or lingered in your thoughts? Drop a comment, share your feelings, and if this tale moved you, give it a like and hit subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive, and I hope you'll join me for the next one. I stood at the edge of my new beginning, the weight of truth no longer a burden, but a foundation. I learned to hold space for pain and growth, to see myself not as broken, but as whole in a different way. The future stretched out, not a promise, but an invitation, one I accepted with steady hands. The past had closed its chapter. What lay ahead was mine to write, shaped by my choices, my strength, my heart.